Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So again, if you just logged on, make sure that you sign in on the chat. But today we are getting started on our pants. So just as a reminder, notebook 1 was due today via Blackboard, and then also your pants swatch so that I can approve your fabric was due also via Blackboard. There are 2 different links in 2 different folders. So the folder for notebook 1 has the notebook 1 link, and then the folder for the pants project has that link. So make sure you've got those turned in. And then one thing is I got a couple emails from people saying that it told them their project was late when they submitted it this morning. I accidentally put the wrong time for my morning class. I put the 10 o'clock time versus the 1 o'clock time on there. So I went in and fixed that. So if you turned it in, it'll show me a timestamp, and I'll be able to just verify that it was on time. Okay, so moving on to our pants. Today, what we're going to be talking about is making sure that our fabric is prepared for cutting. And then once we've cut out all of our pieces, making sure that our pieces are prepared for sewing. So these are going to be quite a few steps that you'll have to go through over the next several days, preparing your fabric so that next week we can actually start stitching on our pattern pieces. So the first thing we need to talk about is preparing our fabric. So we went over last semester getting your fabric pre-washed and pre-shrunk. And then also getting it on grain. So those again are still the first 2 steps that we need to take care of whenever we are getting our fabric prepared. But for wool, it's a little bit different than for cotton. For cotton, last semester, we were able to just put our fabric through the washer, through the dryer, because that's typically how you would launder a cotton garment. But for wool, wool is a dry clean only fabric. So when it comes to pre-shrinking your fabric, you have 2 options. The first option is to dry clean it. So you can take your yardage of fabric to the dry cleaner and get them to dry clean it. And then when you pick it up, you'll be ready to start cutting. The other option that doesn't cost any money is to do a simple version of that at home. And so I'm going to talk to you about a wool fiber, and we'll do a little bit of a preview of what you'll learn in textiles when you get to that class. But we need to know some of it now because we're dealing with wool fibers. So wool has to be laundered differently. I'm going to go ahead and show you. Okay, so this is a wool fiber. So we've got coarse wool, fine wool, alpaca wool, cashmere, and then it goes into different strands of different types of fibers so that you can see the difference between these wool fibers versus some of our other common fibers that we use. So this is on a microscopic level looking at the different types of fibers. So if you'll notice, all of these wool fibers have these very textured ridges or scales on them versus you'll see silk. Silk is really nice and smooth. Also a natural fiber that comes from an animal. Linen is a natural fiber that comes from a plant. And so that one has a little bit more texture, but pretty straight. Cotton is twisted as it's being turned into a thread from a fiber. And so it typically has a lot of twist to it. And you can see that kind of spiral action with the cotton. And then polyester is a man-made fiber. And so that one is essentially a form of plastic that's being extruded through a very, very tiny hole to create a thread. And so that's why it's this really nice, smooth, kind of tubular shape. So I wanted to give you just that quick overview so that you could see the difference of, for instance, the cotton fiber that we used last semester versus those wool fibers that have this really textured edge to them and have those scales on them, because those scales are what cause us to have to treat wool differently. If you've ever had a wool garment that you have accidentally laundered through a regular washing machine and it's shrunk up quite a bit, The reason for that is because those scales, as they get exposed to heat and to friction, they interlock and they kind of those scales lock together, and it shrinks all of those fibers into a much smaller space than what they were before. And so just the makeup of the fibers, or the distance between the fibers, I guess I should say, gets smaller and shrinks because instead of those fibers sitting next to each other, they are tangling and interlocking with each other. So that's why we have to treat wool differently. So what we're going to do at home is, if you don't want to take it to the dry cleaner, then what you can do at home is you can hand wash it. And what I want you to do is hand wash it in cold water so that we're not introducing that heat element. And then we also need to try and agitate it the least amount possible. So the agitation is when the washer, the middle of the washer, either it tumbles it to get that agitation, and that agitation is what kind of scrubs the dirt out of the fiber or out of the fabric. We don't want a lot of agitation with wool because we'll start to interlock those scales. So what you're going to do is, the best case scenario is if you can put it in a large tub, like your bathtub, with cold water and a little bit of laundry detergent, and then just kind of swirl it around so that it's nice and loose, and swirl it around. And then once you've left it in there for a while, I'd probably leave it in there for like 10 or 15 minutes so that it can fully soak in. And then after that, you can drain it and rinse it with cold water, just clean cold water to get that soap out of there. And then we're gonna lay it flat to dry. We do not wanna hang it up to dry, because if you do, gravity is gonna be pulling on it and it's gonna stretch your fabric out and it's gonna get it off grain even more. So we wanna make sure that we lay it flat to dry. So you can lay it out on a big table or on the floor, wherever you have space. And you can wring out quite a bit of that water so that it's not soaking wet when you take it out. You can wring it out. And I kind of, instead of twisting it, I usually kind of just scrunch it so that I'm agitating it the least amount possible. But try and get as much of that water out and then lay it flat to dry. So that would be the home version of kind of dry cleaning your wool fabric to get it to shrink. What we want to do is take out that natural shrink that the fiber has in its length. So a fiber, whenever it's being turned into a thread, it's kind of stretched and pulled into a thread. And so when it gets wet and it dries, it'll naturally kind of contract a little bit. But what we don't want to do is cause extra shrinkage because the scales are interlocking. So we've got to kind of hit that middle area. But you'll need to pre-launder your fabric. And then once you've got that done, then you're going to put your fabric on grain. And so on Blackboard, I've uploaded all of our videos from last semester. Putting your fabric on grain should be the same process as what we did for cotton. In that sense, this one is not any different. The only minor difference that might happen is if your wool is a looser weave, meaning those threads, when they were, whenever they were weaving your fabric together, they weren't pulled as tight, pulled as taut, and there aren't as many threads per inch as cotton. So if that's the case, whenever you're going to tear the ends, when you snip and you tear the ends, you may have to pull a little bit faster. So with cotton, you can kind of pull and it naturally tears because it's a really tight weave. Depending on the wool that you got, if it's not tearing really easily, then usually what I have to do is kind of like you're ripping off a Band-Aid, you have to kind of yank it a little bit faster and it'll tear for you. So that may be the only difference. But all of the, and I just want to remind everyone to turn on your cameras. I've got a couple people, 1, 2, 3, it looks like, with cameras off. But we're going to pre-launder and get our fabric on grain. And again, I have uploaded all of those old videos to Blackboard. There's a file that says construction demonstrations from ADM 1303, which was our last semester's class. And it says fall 2020 on there. So the grain video is in there. If you need to watch it again, you can go back and refresh yourself on how to get your fabric on grain. Okay, and then once we've got those two things done, then we're ready to start cutting our fabric. So I'm gonna switch cameras and we're gonna start talking about actually cutting our fabric out. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now we're over here, and this fabric is not the actual fabric that I'm gonna use to cut out. I just wanted to lay it out to kind of give y'all a refresher about cutting your pieces. But this one you can see is very wrinkly. You want to make sure after you've laundered yours that you get all of those big wrinkles out so that they don't interfere with the shape of your pattern pieces as you're cutting. So if I was using this fabric for real, I would need to go iron this and press all of those wrinkles out. But what I wanted to talk to y'all today about is just reminding y'all about how to cut these out and some of those principles that we went over last semester. So the first thing is the color code of your pattern pieces. The all black pieces will be the ones that get cut out of your wool. And then you'll have your red pieces. So this is one that is a fusing piece. So those fully red pieces will get cut out of your fusible interfacing. And then you'll have blue pieces. So this one is blue, needs to get cut out of my lining. So we'll need to make sure that you're cutting everything out of the proper fabric. And then all three of these fabrics have a selvage. So can anyone tell me what the selvage is? We've gone over this a couple times, and you should be using it every time you cut out your fabric. Can anyone remind me what a selvage is or how to find it?
It's the raw, unfinished edge of the fabric where it's not woven as tightly and it's not suitable to be used for like making clothes.
So a little bit opposite of what you're saying. So it is not suitable to be used for clothes. So mine is right here on this edge. So it's not raw, it is the machine finished edge. So that is the machine finished edge that does not fray. So that's one of the easiest ways to find it, is to know, like for this edge, even though it has that kind of little fringe, you might be able to see that textured fringe on the edge. When I go and I pull on that, I'm not able to ravel or to pull any of those threads out. So that is my machine finished edge, that as the large machines in the factory are weaving this fabric, that's the machine finished edge that where the fabric is kind of being held onto the machines. So the raw edge is over here where it was cut, and you might be able to see some of those frayed edges. So on this one, whenever I pull on a thread here, I can pull out threads. So this side is the side that ravels, that's the cut edge or the raw edge, versus the machine finished edge, which is the selvage. Okay, so the reason we need to know that is because as we're cutting, we need to use that selvage as our reference point for all of our pattern pieces. Every single pattern piece will have a grain line on it, and that grain line always needs to be parallel to our selvage. Okay, so the way that we do that is by measuring. So if you remember that I showed you last semester, if I've got my piece right here, it fits in this spot, then I need to make sure that it's not slightly tilted one way or the other. So lay it down there wherever it fits. And then what we're gonna do is measure from our grain line out to the edge of our selvage. And so for mine right now, it's hitting at about 7.5 inches. I'm gonna go ahead and put a pin right there so it doesn't move on me. Oops, hello. And then I'm going to go down to the other end of my pattern piece and do the same thing. I want it to hit at that same measurement. So whatever my measurement was over there, it needs to be the same distance over here. That way I know that line is parallel to the selvage. Okay, so I would put it here. I can tilt it up or down so that it hits at that 7.5. And then I can put a pin in here. And once I've got all my grain lines parallel, then I can go back and pin my edges before I cut. But I want to do that with every single piece. The other thing that we need to consider, and actually, I should have gone over this before I switched cameras. I'm gonna have to switch back really quick. But the other thing that we need to consider is nap or pile. And this is a new term. So I'm gonna switch back over to my computer real quick. Nap or pile is a new term. Those are both the same name for two different names for the same thing. But nap or pile is whenever the fibers of your fabric stand off the surface. So velvet is one of the most common ones that people think of. Also, the material that bath towels are made out of is called like a French terry cloth. That has these loops. That's why that fabric is so absorbent, and why they use it for towels is because it has these loops that stand off of the surface of the fabric. So those are kind of two of the most common ones, but basically it has this fiber that stands off the surface, and it creates this pile that can be manipulated. So you'll see on this fabric, this is the exact same fabric, but one side looks shiny and bright and the other side looks darker. That's because the pile is facing two different directions. So as you brush it, so with your hand, you can brush it back and forth, and it will change colors because of the way the light is reflecting off of those fibers. So whenever we cut with that type of fabric, we need to make sure that we're taking that into account, and that we want all of our pile to be facing the same direction on each of our pattern pieces. We don't ever want the pile to be facing an opposite direction on one of our pattern pieces. So for instance, for our pants, if you had 3 pant legs, like 2 fronts and 1 back, that all faced one direction, and then you had 1 pant leg that was cut upside down, and the pile faced a different pant leg, that pant leg is going to be a different color. It's going to appear darker because the pile is going in a different direction. So some wools, especially if you get a medium weight wool or a heavyweight wool, some wools will have a nap or a pile. So I want you to look at yours and see if you have it. And you can test that by brushing your hand across the surface. If it changes colors and it appears darker when you brush across it or lighter, then you have a pile, okay? And this is one last image of what that looks like. So when the pile is being brushed up, it appears darker. And when it's being brushed down, it appears lighter, okay? And in the industry, we typically want that pile to be all brushed down on the body. So whenever they cut out garments, typically they will brush all that pile down, and then they'll cut to where the top of the piece is going the correct direction, so that when they wear it, all that pile will be brushed down. So I want you to do the same for your pants. If you have a fabric that has a pile on it or a nap to it, then you need to consider that. So I'm going to go back to my other camera, and I'm going to show you what that looks like on the big yardage of fabric. So if I was over here with my fabric, what I would want before I started cutting out my pieces, if this had a pile, I would want to brush it all down, and that down direction should be the way that it naturally falls. If you're having to work against the grain and you're having to brush it up, then you're brushing it the wrong direction. And it's typically brighter when it's down and then darker when it's up is the most common. So I want you to put it to where the top of the nap is at the waistline of your pants, and then you brush everything down. So you'll just use your hand and you'll kind of just rub your hand across the fabric, brush it all down, and then you can put your pattern pieces on top and start cutting stuff out, okay? But it's very important, especially with a nap, that all of the tops of your pieces go the same direction. So I would never want to flip a pattern piece upside down to where my waist is facing the other way. So this is the hem and this is the waist. I don't ever want to cut that way. I want all of my pieces to be going the same direction, okay? So take that into account if you have it, and make sure to prepare your fabric for that nap if you have it. And even if you don't have it, all of your waistlines, all of the tops of your pieces should be facing the same direction when you cut out, okay? So get your pieces on there, and then again, the further away you get from the selvage, you still need to use some sort of ruler. It doesn't really matter what the measurement is. It just matters that it's consistent. So you'll see here, my ruler's not quite long enough to reach the selvage. What I usually do in that case is I grab a different type of ruler, or a thread, even a string, something that I can use to mark. So if this was just a string, I would measure it here and mark and say, okay, that's the end of my string. And then I would do the same here, because all you're worried about is that that's the same. You don't really care what the number is. Okay. So lay out all your pieces, and we've got some more over here. So all of these pieces, again, need to be going the same direction with the waist up top. So this is my facing up at the top. This would be my fly shield. Remember that notch? So this one you can't see from far away, but you have that notch down at the bottom. That's for the bottom of your zipper. So where there's no notch at the top, that is the top. So make sure all of them are facing that same direction. And then the last thing that's important to remember is for cut 2. So this one, for instance, is cut 2 because we're going to have a left and a right pocket on our pants. So the first one you cut face up. The second one you need to flip and cut face down. So don't forget, and you need to pay attention to any time it says cut 2. So this one, you'll have 2 separate pant legs for the front because the zipper area changes. But for the back, they're the exact same. So you only have one pattern piece, but you need to cut it twice. So you'll cut it once this way and then flip it and cut it the second time with it face down. Okay. Okay, are there any questions about cutting everything out before we move on? I just wanted to give y'all that refresher from last semester. Okay, then I am going to move my camera again, and we are going to switch over to interfacing. After you get everything cut out, the next step is going to be interfacing your pieces that require it. Coming over here, I've got all of my pieces cut out from my fabric. Okay, and this is my green lining and then my green wool for my actual pants. Okay, so the pieces that will have fusing are your fly facing. So let me grab all of the pieces. We have, for the zipper, we have our fly facing and our fly shield. So those will get put together with the wool pieces. For your welt pocket that will be on the back of your pant, you'll have your welt facing and your actual welt piece. And then the last one is your waistband. So if you remember during the demonstration last time, I told you when we have our real waistband, it'll be this super long rectangle. So this is the side where the buttonhole is going to go, and then it wraps around. This is center back of the body, and then it keeps wrapping, and we come all the way back to center front with our button. So that long rectangle is your waistband, and that will have a fusing piece that goes with it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and grab all those pieces, and we're going to fuse them. So as you cut out, you need to make sure that you've identified what is the front and what is the back of your fabric. For mine, they're different textures. The back is much more like matte and just kind of smooth versus the front has these kind of little diagonal lines going through it. Those are called twills, a twill line or a twill weave. So yours may have two different textures like mine. One may be more shiny than the other, but make sure that you identify which one you're going to use as the front, and you want to stay consistent with that. So as you're cutting, you always want to cut with the front side up. And then whenever you're fusing everything, double check that you're fusing the right side, the correct side of your piece, okay? And if it's hard to tell front from back, if they look the exact same, to the eye, whenever you're close, they will look the same, but when you're further away, so if somebody was wearing these pants and you were standing 10 feet away from them, they will be able to tell if you cut things from the wrong side. So once you pick a side, especially if it's hard to tell the difference from front and back, you need to make sure that you mark that side somehow and that you always use that side as the front, okay? So it doesn't really matter which one you pick, but you've got to pick and stick with it. And the way that I usually do that is I usually mark the back with an X in chalk. So that way I can know this is the back of my fabric, and then also my chalk won't show on the outside of my garment if for some reason it doesn't come out. Okay, so this is I did my fly facing first. Now I'm doing my fly shield. Make sure that whatever interfacing color you choose, that it's not going to show through your fabric. So mine is white. Typically I would use a black for this dark of a fabric, but white is what I had available and I didn't want to be wasteful. So I'm using it. But make sure, the most important thing is if you have a light colored fabric, that you don't use black, because that's whenever it typically shows through to the front. I've got a crease right here, so I'm going to get that out before I move on. You'll notice as you go through this project that pressing wool is kind of its own adventure. Wool tends to have a memory, and whenever you first get it, it remembers being woven into a flat piece of fabric, and it doesn't want to take the shape that you want to give it. So you have to kind of reprogram and give it a new memory, so that it will stay where you want it to stay. So we'll press a crease into one of our pieces in just a minute, and I'll show you some techniques for pressing wool, which we talked about a little bit last semester when we did our wool sample for our notebook. Okay, and the last piece that we need to fuse is our waistband. So again, make sure that you're doing it on the proper side. We don't want to accidentally fuse the front. Just got that crease out as much as I can. See, it likes to hold those creases and it doesn't want to let them go. And then other times when you want to put a crease in it, it doesn't want to listen. So, okay, and I have black for this one just because this one was so long, I had to switch fabrics, but I want yours to be consistent. So, like I said, pick and stick. Now, the last thing we need to do before we head over to our serger is we're going to press a crease into that shield for our fly. So remember, we have our fly facing and our fly shield. If you remember from the demonstration that we did for the fly front zipper, this particular piece we have to fold in half and press before we serge it. So I need to make sure that I'm folding it in half and serging the right side. So fold it in half, wrong sides together, down those notches that are down the length of your piece. And this is where I said we were going to press a crease into our piece, and I'll talk about techniques. So the most common technique in the industry is beading your fabric. So this is used for really thick fabrics, for fabrics that have a strong memory and that don't want to let go of the form that they were in previously. So in that case, you would get a wooden block, which we have these in the lab. I don't have any here at home, but it's basically just a smooth wooden block, one that's not going to splinter and ruin your fabric. But you use that and you literally pound and beat that crease until it lays flat. Because right now it's hard to see on camera, but right now it's kind of popping up and it's not very crisp. It's not very clean. It just keeps popping up and trying to unfold on me. So beading your seams, so you would literally just pound it while it's hot and steamy. You would pound it until that crease kind of subdued into a crisp crease. But since I don't have that at home, I'm going to teach you an alternate method where we get it super hot. So I usually put that iron on there, get it really, really hot, which you need to make sure that as you're pressing, you have your iron on the proper setting for wool fabric. And then I put something flat and heavy on top. So you probably saw me do this last semester where I usually put a textbook or something like that on top and I let it cool while it's being held down into that crease. And if it cools in that shape, then it will reset that memory. So they usually don't do this in the industry because it takes longer. You have to sit here and wait for it to cool down, which is why they typically beat it instead. But this is one method that you can use. And also this one is really only good for flat creases or flat seams. If I had a curved seam, I wouldn't be able to put a textbook on top of it. Okay, so once you've got that crease to where it's staying down, so that's pretty crisp, then you can move on. So we're going to serge this one, and I need to make sure that I'm serging the long side and the bottom. And the way that you're going to find that bottom is with that notch. So I've got this notch down here, and that shows me where my zipper is going to end. So I know that's the bottom. Okay, let's switch over to our serger machine, and we'll go ahead. I'll go through every single piece of the pattern, and I'll tell you what portions need to be serged and what portions do not need to be serged. Okay, so here we are at my serger, and we're going to go over, like I said, every piece in the pattern, and I'm going to tell you what areas need to be serged and what areas do not. Now, for this one, I am giving you the answers because we've never done it before in this way. But essentially what I'm doing as I go is I'm thinking about what sides of this pattern piece are going to be exposed on the inside of the garment. What areas are you going to be able to see when you turn this garment inside out, and what areas will be enclosed. So if you think about our waistband, by the time we put our waistband on, all of those waist seam allowances will be sandwiched in between the layers of the waistband. So you won't be able to see those at all. They'll be fully enclosed. So those areas of the garment that are fully enclosed do not need to be serged. But any areas that will be exposed or will be visible on the inside of the garment need to be serged. So this is a process that we'll go through with each of the garments that we do this semester. And I'll talk you through it. But in future semesters, it's a process that you'll have to think through on your own and figure out for my particular design, what areas are going to be exposed and be visible. And I need to serge those areas. Okay, so the first piece we're doing is that one we just talked about, the shield. I'm trying to get my lighting right. It seems a little dark here. Let's see if this helps at all. It's a little brighter. Okay, so I've got my shield here, and I'm going to serge that long edge and the bottom. The top, I don't need to serge. Oops, I got it upside down. The top, I don't need to serge because it's going to get stuck up into the waistband. So let's go ahead and do the side. And again, the only thing I should be cutting off are those kind of frayed edges. I shouldn't be cutting off any large portions of my fabric. Okay, so there is my shield. Next is my facing, my fly facing. So this one, this edge will get enclosed in between the facing and the pant leg. This part will get enclosed in the waistline. And so now we just need to do that J stitch area. That one will be exposed. And just make sure to carefully go around that curve so you don't cut anything off, but your thread also needs to hug the edge of the fabric. So there is the facing. Next, we're gonna go to, okay, so the next piece I have that I interfaced was my welt pocket facing. This one, we will not serge until we sew the actual pocket together. So if you remember when we did our welt pocket sample, we sewed all of those layers together and then we serged around the outside of the pocket bag. So we'll do that same process with our pants. So this one will eventually get serged, but not right now. So set it aside. Same thing with my actual welt. So this is for my welt pocket. This is that welt pattern piece. Nothing right now, so no serging on that one. My waistband, so this is my long rectangular waistband, will be fully enclosed. So remember, we fold it in half and all of those seam allowances get tucked up into your waistband in between those layers. So none of those edges will be visible by the time we're done. So waistband does not need to get serged at all. Next is my slash pocket bag. So this is the slash pocket. It's gonna go in the front. This one, we will serge just our side seam. The waist is going to get stuck up in the waistband. And the curve, the pocket bag part, the curve will get serged once we have the pocket fully constructed. So again, we serged that one after we constructed it. So the only thing I'm gonna serge right now is this side seam. And I'm gonna grab the pattern piece because this fabric's a little hard to hold up and show you. Okay, so here's my pattern piece. Let it zoom out. Here, I'm gonna just show you face to face. Okay, so this is the pocket piece. Up top is the notch, that's where the notches are, that's your waistline. It'll get sandwiched in your waistband. Curved part we will serge later. So the only part on this one we need to serge is this side seam area. Okay, so we'll do that for both of those pocket bag pieces. And then same thing on the other one, you should have two of them. Okay, next we have our lining to that pocket bag. So this is that slash pocket facing that gets cut out of the lining fabric. This one, we do not need to serge any of it right now. It will get serged later whenever the pocket is constructed. For our welt pocket bag, so that's the big rectangular pocket bag that's out of lining. Again, nothing now. We will serge it later when the pocket is constructed. Okay, so that leaves us just with our pant legs. So again, I'm going to grab the pattern pieces for those so I can show you which sides need to be serged. Okay, so first is my front. So this is my left front. It has that step out at the center front where the zipper is going to go. So for this one, we don't need to serge this because it will get enclosed by that zipper. We do need to serge our crotch though. So from where that step out is, this crotch area that's only a 1/2 inch seam allowance, we're going to serge. This will get enclosed in the pocket, so we don't need to do that. Waist will get enclosed in the waistband, so we don't need to do that. So the only places on here that we're serging is the crotch, the inseam right here next to the crotch, that's the inseam that goes down the middle of your legs. And then the side seam over here next to the pocket, that will go down the outside of your leg. The hem, we do not need to serge because that raw edge of the hem will get covered with our our hem tape. So we did that catch stitch sample where we put the hem tape on there. That will get covered by the hem tape, so we do not need to serge that one. Okay, it'll be the same for the other front piece. So the other front piece looks slightly different because it has the step in up top. Let me just make sure. Okay, so step in here, we do not need to serge. The crotch we do, inseam and side seam for this front, for the right front. And then for the back piece, you'll have 2 of these. Your entire crotch needs to get serged because we don't have a zipper to worry about here. So from the waist all the way down to the inseam, we serge that crotch. We serge the inseam and we serge the side seam, not the waist and not the hem. Okay, so I'm going to go through those right now. Okay. So I'm going to serge both of my fronts on camera, but for my back, I'm only going to serge one of them because they're identical. And you'll just do the same process on each one. Okay. So I've got my left front first where it has that step out at the top. I don't want to serge that straight part, but I do want to serge the curve of the crotch. So I'm going to lift up my serger foot, place it under there to where the needles are hitting right where that step out ends. Then put it down, and now I can just serge that bottom curve area. And again, be very careful of that blade. Right now, my fabric's in front of the blade. I don't want to cut into my pant. So make sure to pull it back out of the way as you serge. So instead of watching the needles, you should be watching your blade and making sure that you're not cutting anything you shouldn't be. Okay, now the inseam. Skip the hem, and I'm going to go around and do my side seam. And again, I do not need to do that slash pocket area or the waistline. Okay, next front piece. Find my zipper area. Okay, so this one has a step in at the top. So right where that step out begins is the crotch, and we need to serge that. So again, lift up your foot, put it under to where your needles are touching where you want to begin serging, and then go ahead and serge. So serging this crotch area is probably going to be the most challenging part of the whole pant to serge. So make sure that you practice that. You may just cut out a curve and practice that before you get to your real fabric. Skip the hem and do the side seam. Okay, now I'm going to do just one back piece, but you'll do the same process to both. So for this one, we need to serge that entire crotch. So starting up at the waist corner, this is my crotch, this is my waist. Go all along that curve of the crotch. And then we'll do inseam. Skip the hem and do the side seam. And again, this side seam does not have a pocket slash cut out, so you're just going all the way up to the waist. Okay, and then repeat that for your second back piece. And you should have all of your pieces serged and ready to start cutting, or sorry, ready to start sewing for next week. Okay.